Hello, aspiring original advocates. I just wanted to provide an update on the outline video. I found that since the video I constructed last year, I've come to a couple of additional thoughts on the outline. Nothing major though, so I haven't reconstructed the whole video, but I just wanted to provide an addendum on some other thoughts I've had as I've been working with original advocates over the past year. In terms of the organization, something I would say has changed. I've edited this first paragraph on what I think you should do, as well as moving the root cause and inherency, combining them into one central location and putting them earlier in the speech. So let me walk through my logic here. I think the best thing to begin with your original advocacy is this paragraph that I like to call context. I used to call it the topic explanation, but I found that students very often would just summarize their entire speech in the first paragraph, which is not what I'm looking for. I think the better way to think of it is thinking through the context of the topic. So you need to explain the necessary context for us to appreciate what is going on with the topic. And the big danger here is you jump straight into asserting something as a problem, and I don't even understand the context that the topic appears in. The best example I have of this is I was working with a student who is constructing an original advocacy on compounding pharmacies. Now, I'm a pretty well-educated individual, and I had no idea what compounding pharmacies were. So I was sitting there wondering, he was telling me compounding pharmacies are bad. They lead to thousands of deaths. They cause XYZ problems. They end up having faulty medications. And I was like, wait a second, what even is a compounding pharmacy, and who would even use it? And so then he started providing a more technical definition in his next draft, and he said a compounding pharmacy is a place where drugs end up having to be altered because of some special need. Even then, I was still like, but where are these and who ends up using them? Finally, we got this speaker to develop this first context paragraph where he explained, and he did it step by step. He said, let's say you are prescribed a drug by a doctor, but you have some special condition like an allergy or some other special requirement, which means that you can't take the normally mass-produced prescribed drug. What you then need to do is go to a compounding pharmacy. These occur all across the nation, but they are places where specialists or pharmacists end up altering the compound to meet your special needs. The problem is there's very little oversight over these compounding pharmacies, which leads to problems. So hopefully you see there, I needed the context in order to understand even where this topic is occurring. So before you can prove to me that there's a problem, I need to understand the context in which it appears. I see this a lot, especially when original advocates try to assert that some mysterious substance is killing me. I need to know just where that substance even appears or what's the context in which it occurs so that I can appreciate the deeper aspects of the problem. So first body paragraph is the context. Next, I would say go to the root cause and inherency. So explain the root cause of the problem, then explain why nothing is being done, and try to be as concrete as possible. Paint a vivid picture, and I'll give some examples in just a moment. But think through the logic here, right? You provide a context that helps to establish the problem or the topic itself. Then you say, okay, but why even is this an issue in the first place? One important thing is to avoid circular reasoning. So a topic we're going to look at in just a moment, dirty medical tools or dirty medical instruments in hospitals. If you were to say that the root cause of the problem is dirty medical instruments are a problem because the government hasn't taken steps to make sure medical instruments are clean, that would be circular, right? Because it asserts that the problem is a problem because it's a problem, which doesn't make any sense. The question I have is, wait, if medical instruments aren't being cleaned properly, why aren't they being cleaned properly? Just telling me the government hasn't taken steps to make sure they're clean is definitional if you're saying that they're not clean. My question is, if this is such a serious problem, why hasn't anyone taken steps to fix the problem? What's going on here that's leading medical instruments to be dirty in the first place? So I'm seeing a lot of circular reasoning oftentimes in novice original advocacy, root cause and inherency. It's not enough to just say that something hasn't been done yet. The question is, what are the underlying structural causes that are leading this problem to be a big issue? One important note, I've seen original advocates switch the topic explanation or this context paragraph and the root cause paragraph, this second one. They can sometimes be reversed if it makes more logical sense to begin with the root cause for the audience to understand the context. So there are some instances where we actually won't appreciate the context in which the topic appears unless you wind back the clock and give us the step-by-step of the root causes. This is pretty rare, but sometimes it can occur, especially if the topic is pretty unknown and we don't even really understand it, and understanding how the topic even emerged in the first place is necessary to even appreciate the context. So I know that's pretty abstract, but I will give you feedback if I think that's the case with your topic. Next is when we get to the harms and impacts. So again, think of the logical flow. You start by providing us the context so we understand what's going on. Then you go to, all right, well, why is this even a problem in the first place? And then you get to, okay, and what impacts does this cause? What are the serious problems that are caused by the topic? And typically you want to focus on the total monetary cost to society, the health effects on individuals, how many lives are being lost, whether there are broader social justice concerns about equality or discrimination or oppression that are at hand, all of those big, weighty impacts or problems. And you want to make sure to have an explicit justification for why the topic causes the problems you outline. It's not just enough to say, look, 70,000 people are dying. That statistic is only powerful if you can prove that your topic is the root cause of those people dying. This portion, even though in your outline you'll just have it all under the header of harms and impacts, in reality, it could oftentimes be multiple paragraphs in terms of the final speech. Oftentimes I see 2 harms and impacts paragraphs as speakers try to group the major areas of big problems that occur due to the topic. Then you build to dramatic implications. And this is still part of harms and impacts, but the reason I group it into its own section is because you need to think of building to a dramatic climax, typically by including vivid, concrete stories of real people who have suffered at the hands of your topic. And this will oftentimes be a couple of quick stories that you unite to show a pattern of innocent, average, everyday people being adversely impacted by this horrific topic. And this brings the speech out of the realm of just statistics and affecting the audience logically, and starts to affect the audience emotionally by getting them to imagine real people. And then at the end of that paragraph is when you typically generalize those stories and abstract it beyond the concrete examples to give us the broader, most serious societal harms and impacts, right? So you might give us 3 stories of Timmy, of Sally, and of Bob, right, who were all adversely affected by the topic. And then at the end of that paragraph, you'll say, but this isn't just the story of Bob, or it's not just the story of Timmy, or it's not just the story of Sally. This is the story of 70,000 people whose lives are ruined every single year due to this problem. That's the type of rhetoric that you want here, that builds to that climactic moment where you have the powerful rhetoric, where you can kind of end on it's time to stop, or it's time to change, right? And that leads perfectly into this final bit of the speech, solvency, where you'll provide a concrete advocacy, right? Therefore, I advocate the United States federal government, I forgot the word government there, implement the following 3-part plan or something like that, right? So you need to explain then what each part or plank, it's typically referred to, of your advocacy does. So you'd be like, the first part of the plan, blankety blankety blank. The second part of the plan, blankety blankety blank. And for each of those parts or planks, you need to prove it works. And so that is best done by providing empirical examples. If you can show me that there are other places where the plan was implemented, you're like, and this worked in Canada, or this worked in Germany, and you can point to the statistics there. Like when they implemented this policy, the problem or the number of people who died from this problem was reduced by 95%. That's pretty effective, right? And if you can provide statistics and studies to back it up, and of course expert support, like this is supported by Dr. Blankety Blank of this university, who argues that, insert the quote from her study, and that would be really, really good. So that's what you want to do in solvency to support your plan. And I would say overall, right, the best solvency proposals or the best advocacies are the ones that address specific root causes. A big point I want to make about the root cause or the inherency is the best root causes are failures of policy. It's not just like the federal government hasn't done anything. It's like there is some problematic piece of legislation in place currently that is propelling problems to exist. Or even if it's not caused by government policy, at the very least, if you have a specific root cause, it makes it very clear for your solvency what you need to fix, right? If you say that there's a specific reason why this has occurred, then all you need to do is fix that specific reason. Otherwise, your solvency, your advocacy will feel like a magic wand that you're pulling out of nowhere. And certainly if you don't have good empirical examples or statistics or expert support, it will also just feel like you're asserting that some magical plan will fix the problem with no substantiation. So hopefully that makes sense. What I want to do very quickly is just look through a couple of examples of ways that successful original advocates have organized their speeches. So you can see here, this is Arnav Bau's opioid crisis speech, ended up getting second in the state of California. And so let's just go step by step. So he begins by establishing the context of his speech, which is that opioid addiction can affect anybody because US opioid prescription rates are so high. These are like painkillers that you'd be prescribed after an operation. And so right off the bat, he subverts the expectation that drug addiction is just a problem for hardcore drug addicts, that when it comes to opioids, this is totally different. And the US has super high prescription drug rates, much higher, 3,000% higher than any other country. Then he goes into the root causes. So he's established the context, like, all right, our rates of prescription are so high. Why? Right? That's the next logical question. Notice how this is a logical sequencing that makes sense, right, organizationally. So next he asks, all right, why is this happening? And the root cause and inherency is about big pharmaceutical companies paying doctors to prescribe opioids to patients, right? They pay doctors over $6 million to prescribe their drugs to patients, and they are falsifying scientific data and misleading the Food and Drug Administration to increase the perceived safety of their drugs. So they're paying lots of money to push out these falsified studies saying they're safe, and they're paying doctors a lot to prescribe the drugs. Ruh-roh. Then the next couple of bits of this speech are all about the harms and impacts, and he gives us lots of stats about how many people are addicted, how many deaths occur, stats of overall monetary cost to society, the stats of U.S. consumption of the global opioid supply. And so you can see here, right, like 20 million people are suffering from opioid abuse, $417 billion are spent every year. We consume a whopping 80% of the global opioid supply. This many people, 115 people die every day from addiction. So we get the big weighty impacts, right? Then he builds to the dramatic implications where he starts bringing in real people, right? These are perfectly normal people, says Arnav. People like Corey Boland, a 19-year-old who has a whole life ahead of him, who was prescribed opioids for a broken arm. His doctors asked him 2 or 3 questions, gave him opioids, and they got him hooked. He took pills, woke up unable to see straight. He was constantly looking for his next fix, and he turned to heroin, all because his doctors were pushing him pills. Corey died from heroin use because he was so addicted, leaving his family with regret for years. Then he gives another story, right, very quick. Matthew Azzini, cheerful New York public school teacher who overdosed on opioids in his own school bathroom. And then, another one, Kevin Ryan, who overdosed in a Starbucks bathroom. People like Carla Devalicho, a nurse who overdosed on the same opioid she was prescribing to patients. So notice all these stories give us a very vivid picture that we can connect with more emotionally. And then this is the expanding outwards, right? People like 20 million of us, like our friends, our family, and ourselves, like the teenagers who didn't know what they were getting into, like the kids who were forced onto it, like the thousands of men, women, and children that died from substance abuse in just 2016, totaling up to more deaths than the entire Vietnam War. Don't let us go gentle into that good night. Don't let this continue. So pretty powerful rhetoric, right? Pretty powerful rhetoric. And then his solution addressed those root causes that we outlined above, right? That the United States federal government should restrict the prescription of excess opioids, right? So we're overprescribing it. And second, prevent big pharma from lobbying to doctors or Congress. All right, makes sense. Let's look at another one real quick. Nathan Gong's dirty medical instruments or dirty medical tools. Um, this was a speech. This is a speech that I find pretty compelling. So right off the bat, we're skipping past the introduction, but the first body paragraph, he provides a necessary context, opens up by establishing that there are over 46.5 million surgical procedures that are performed every year in the US, and that at every surgical procedure and checkup, doctors use medical instruments, ranging from microscopic scopes to plain old scissors to other implements to operate on a patient's body. And so most of us probably think the tools that they are using are free of bacteria and other contamination. It's a hospital, right? But unfortunately, these tools are almost always dirty. And so right in this first opening paragraph, he establishes the context that establishes what's going on right now that's problematic and gives us that necessary background info so that we can appreciate what's going on here. If he just jumped in and said too many medical instruments are dirty across hospitals, I wouldn't totally understand the context in which he's discussing, right? Is he talking about like what's being used in surgery? Is he just talking about, the stethoscope that a doctor would use? I wouldn't really fully understand. And so this context was really helpful. Now I have a very concrete image of exactly the context in which this occurs. He gives us a nice statistics here. 71% end up being dirty. He gives some expert analysis up here. So really good stuff. Then let's keep going down. The next paragraph is about the root cause and the inherency. So again, think of the logical flow. He establishes, hey, all these medical tools are really, really dirty. All this evidence shows. Next, he says, okay, but why is this occurring? Why is it that 60% of all hospitals don't comply with cleaning guidelines? And he gets there. He ends up showing that the reason is because sterilization departments are notoriously understaffed. We just don't have enough people in hospitals because these people are underfunded. They're just paid $17 per hour for a job that's pretty intense. So why would people end up doing that, right? Why would, the great line right here, why would anyone spend their time washing mucus and blood off complex medical tools when they could earn more money by stacking bread at Mr. Pickle's sandwich shop? And so because of this, it leads to chronically understaffed hospital cleaning groups. So notice here, he's doing a good job of providing an explanation of why this problem occurs, and he provides a nice concrete example. In a children's hospital in Texas, the sterilization department workers started to completely skip cleaning, used instruments that they just used instruments that they thought, quote, looked clean. That's a pretty powerful concrete example, right? Now we can imagine this. Next, he got to the actual harms and impacts over the next paragraph. And this is where he showed us that this affects everybody in a hospital, that all of these operations have been canceled because of this problem, that there are over 1.7 million infections, and that ultimately we lose $20 billion every year and more than 100,000 people losing their lives, right? Pretty powerful. Then he gets to the dramatic implications where he goes over the lives of real people like John Harris, a middle-aged man who had a minor surgery on his right shoulder. And in the weeks following the surgery, his scar turned bright red and oozed thick fluid that looked like butter squeezed from a bag. Ew. That night, surgeons opened up Harrison's shoulder, found an infection that had eaten away part of his shoulder bone. Since then, what began as a simple operation had turned into a lengthy struggle that left him for months at a time dependent on hired nurses, unable to dress himself, take a shower, afraid for his life. 2 years after the incident, Harrison had been left with serious damage to his arm to the point that he can't even scratch his own head. So really powerful, right? And then look at this. Further investigation revealed that instead of cleaning the cannulus properly with brushes, the hospital instead ran tap water through the instruments. So wow, right? Now, this story isn't somebody dying, but what I appreciate about it is it seems like something so minor, right? Just a little minor surgery, but it ended up leading to all these complications that made his life really complicated and full of pain and suffering. And then you can see here Nathan expands beyond just the story of John Harrison. This isn't just the story of John. It's the story of more than 60 patients at Porter Hospital, all of who developed serious infections, including hepatitis B, E. coli, and HIV as a result of poor cleaning practices. It's a story of Asniv Tavidgian, who lost his life after being infected with deadly bacteria by a dirty medical scope. It's a story of millions of people who are getting their lives ruined every year, and in the future, it could be the story of any one of us. So wow, powerful, right? And then look, his solution here ends up addressing those direct root causes. Notice the pattern here. When you address the root cause directly, your solution is powerful. The first thing he did was he mandated sanitation by increasing funding to increase the worker salary of the sterilization departments. So that makes it so that they aren't understaffed anymore. And second, improving guidelines so that they have to be held to higher standards for their cleaning procedures of their instruments, not instrucments. All right, so pretty powerful stuff. The final one I want to go over is Iggy Chardos' speech, and this is a speech on nuclear reactors. And in this speech, right, he begins by establishing context where he says, look, there's tons of nuclear waste that hasn't been dealt with. There's 4,000 tons of nuclear waste in California alone. What's interesting is he actually does this in the intro paragraph pretty quickly. He didn't need a whole paragraph to establish this, but instead he establishes more of the context in the root cause and inherency paragraph. In there, he discusses how in the 60s and 70s, there was a wave of nuclear reactors built, and because nuclear energy was seen as the energy of the future. Now, today, most people have turned against nuclear energy, but we now have 5 decades of waste built up, and scientists had agreed 5 decades ago we needed to find a place to store the waste. But Congress kept kicking the can down the road, and 5 decades later, they still haven't agreed on a site. So now we have a massive nuclear waste problem where we've accumulated tons of this radioactive material, and they're just in temporary facilities, and these temporary facilities are really problematic. So again, think of the logical flow here, right? All right, we have tons of nuclear waste. Question that's raised is, why do we have so much waste? We go down here, and now, all right, what issues occur? And so Iggy does a good job of showing us that these temporary storage containers often have way too much nuclear waste stored in them, way more than they were meant to. They don't have adequate repairs and maintenance, and that can lead to leakages of radioactive material. And he gives lots of examples in this speech of this problem occurring in California. He talks about a beach in San Diego, which is no longer safe to swim in because of radioactivity in the water. Second, he starts talking about how these facilities have little regard for their natural surroundings. And then he gives concrete examples of here in the Bay Area, there are nuclear waste facilities that are built on fault lines. And so he gives us a pretty terrifying quote from an expert who says one big earthquake and there could be a massive disaster here, a massive spill of radioactive material. And then he ends it by going into the dangers of radioactive materials, discussing how it destroys your body and causes huge rates of cancer. So he gives all those statistics of how, like, drinking less than 1/500th of a tablespoon of radioactive waste is deadly in less than 7 years. Right? And so children living within 3 miles of a waste storage facility are twice as likely to develop leukemia. So he gives us all these terrifying stats, right? They have 3 times higher cancer rates than otherwise expected, so on and so forth. Then he gets to the dramatic implications where he talks about a man like Richard who won't see his kids graduate from elementary school because he worked near a storage facility. He talked about the Navajo Nation, where a spillage of radioactive waste on their reservation 40 years ago caused 5% of the people exposed to die within 5 years, and now they have much higher cancer rates, right? 26% of Navajo women and 36% of men still have uranium in their bodies, more than any other group in the US. So really terrifying stuff. Ends on that heavy-hitting dramatic implications. Before getting to a solvency, he has this hilarious acronym. We need to nuke our current storage facility, and he makes his plan into an acronym of nationalize, understand, clean up, and expedite. But basically what he's saying is we just need to decide on a place that is free of significant risks. We need to clean up the current facilities and then remove that waste over to those high risk or away from those high risk locations. So that's how Iggy organized his speech. Hopefully these organizations help you in terms of understanding the internal structure of environmental advocacy, and specifically really understanding the logical flow of going from context to root cause to harms to dramatic implications to solvency at the end of the day, and really appreciating that the best solutions are the ones that specifically address the reasons why the problem exists in the first place, those root causes. So if you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully this doesn't change your understanding too much from the previous video that you just watched. I would say if there's anything that seems contradictory between these two videos, defer to my comments in this video, the 2020 edits, the addendum that's more recent rather than the older one. Hopefully that makes sense though, and best of luck in crafting your outline.